Hello, welcome back. We're here now to discuss the third episode of House of Dragon, second of his name.
At the start of the episode, we see what came of the meeting between Daemon and Corlys. They decided to try and deal with the Stepstones on their own. However, this has proven harder than expected, even with dragons at their command. When the scene then switches to King's Landing, we see that 3 years have actually passed and Viserys now has a 2-year-old son named Aegon, while Alicent is pregnant with a second child.
Viserys is feeling a lot of pressure to name Aegon his heir, as he celebrates his son's name day with a great royal hunt. Rhaenyra is there, and it's very clear relations with her father are not ideal, especially as he keeps pushing suitors at her. Viserys himself is trying to hold to his decision to have her as his heir, but he's beginning to have doubts. And there's a very big argument, very public argument between them, and she ends up storming off into Kingswood. So Criston Cole is at her heels, and in the end, they spend a night together, and they commiserate about her life and her fears.
Viserys is also reluctant to send help to the Stepstones, even though he receives news that the war is being lost. When he finally does send a message promising that help is on its way, Daemon becomes determined to win the war before he has to be rescued by his brother. He takes a huge risk to get to the crab feeder and his men to get them out of the caverns where they have bunkered in, but the gamble succeeds with the help of Laenor on Seasmoke and Lord Corlys and his men. When it comes to changes, we have two notable ones for this episode. One concerns a character, and one concerns one of the storylines that take up about half the episode. The character change is in regards to Laenor Velaryon, who's made more of a martial character than he is in the book. He's not actually knighted until somewhat late and for political reasons in the book. It's or for appearance's sake, one could say. Whereas here, he's definitely a knight. He is involved in the fighting in the Stepstones on his dragon Seasmoke. Now, he's a dragon rider in the book as well, but there's actually no mention of him being involved in the campaign on Seasmoke, despite his father being there. Nor, interestingly enough, there's no mention either of his mother Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys being involved in the fighting, and there is a reference to Meleys being later on that she has some battle experience. So it's a bit odd that George left that out, I think.
I really, when we did suggest it to him, actually, when he was working on Fire and Blood, to kind of have Rhaenys kind of explicitly involved. I mean, we know Meleys has experience from the past, I suppose, but it just made sense that, you should have had Rhaenys just taking part in the campaign. Why not?
And the fact that Laenor isn't there might be, the idea of leaving your heir, leaving him at home. But yes, it's not a major change as such, but it is a change to the character, and we will probably discuss that a bit more or mention it later on, because I have some thoughts as to why they made this change.
The storyline has some changes, some not so notable, some more notable, is the war for the Stepstones. There's been some time changes, like Kragos Drahar is actually killed 2 years into the campaign, rather than 3 years as on the show, which is not that important. I think he's beheaded rather than bisected. Would that be the term for?
I think bisected might be appropriate, yes.
The bigger change, however, is the whole Viserys' attitude towards the conflict. On the show, it's his brother's mess. He wants nothing to do with it. He doesn't really, and certainly people like Otto Hightower, like you should, punish them and call them back. It's causing problems. And in Fire and Blood, he actually completely supported it. Even though members of the court weren't so eager. In particular, it's described explicitly. He regularly provided financial backing with lots of gold, like regular infusions, to sustain the efforts. Very different from what they have here. Especially the idea, and you can see why it makes it very dramatic when he suddenly decides, okay, I'm going to pitch in sending ships and men, and then Daemon kind of goes...
Pitches a fit.
Yeah.
Viserys pitches in, Daemon pitches a fit.
Yeah. Finally, the show makes it seem as if the war was going really badly, but there was hardly any troops left, but they needed that support so badly, and it's a bit of a change. The fight for the Stepstones is brutal. It's a slog. It's island to island campaign. By the time I believe that Viserys is called, Viserys kind of believes. Time Daemon believes he's sort of won the conflict. He hasn't even actually won all the Stepstones, which is kind of in keeping with his forebearers, as Aegon and his sisters claim they conquered Dorne, and not exactly.
Not really.
So things never got that desperate. It was a hard fight, but with the regular backing of the Iron Throne, I think they had sellswords and sort of men-at-arms aplenty, ships aplenty to keep going. It never got to a sort of like...
It was just hard to finish it, basically.
It was hard to finish it, exactly.
It's like when you're fighting, rebels or people who, dig in like that, and you're not really fighting another nation or anything. That makes it hard to have a proper finish. It's not like they're going to just surrender as a whole or anything. Obviously, they wanted it to be more dramatic. We're not reviewing again, but it does. It
does make it more dramatic. I mean,
yes, but also it doesn't seem like the plan at the end perhaps makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I will give them, like, if I had a critique, it was sort of for that episode. It's just that, like, it's a very cool sequence.
Yeah,
but it felt, I guess, a little rule of cool, maybe, kind of like, it's cool, so we're gonna do it. And it does highlight as a character Daemon, like, okay, I don't know if it was maybe it was inspired by Barristan Selmy going in alone to, like, basically this idea of a guy alone going out there and managing some ridiculous feat. It's just the sort of Kragas Drehar's brain has to kind of turn off basically to make it work. But hey, maybe, I mean, he's got grayscale, not a detail from the books, by the way. That's I don't know why. Someone just thought it looked cool to have
give
him
the mask and everything.
Yeah, but yeah.
Maybe his brain is a little
addled. Yeah. Now we're on to some background details. This episode mentions Lady Joanna Swan. We have a bit more information. This is straight from the book, straight from Fire and Blood, that she was a niece of Lord Strong, and she was taken at the age of 15 off a ship by Lyseni, who are part of the Kingdom of the Three Sisters, and they in particular were taking, stopping ships from the Westeros and taking away, pretty young men and women to sell to the pleasure houses, and this is one of the big issues that led to Daemon and Corlys getting involved, but it was and Viserys supporting them. So she does get sold to a pillow house because Lord Swan is very stingy and he refuses to pay her ransom. That's not the end of her story, however. She would end up becoming one of the greatest courtesans in Lys. She'd be known as the Black Swan, very, very appropriate. And eventually would basically rule the city in all but name, which is kind of...
Quite a career move, I have to say.
Yeah.
Probably better than she could have done in Westeros, all considered, married off to some lord or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if she's ruling things in the end, like, it doesn't sound like she's planning to return. She's just kind of settled her life. Like, okay.
Yeah, no, she probably decided that running Lys was a better deal. So we have Viserys and Alicent having a scene by the big bonfire when they're out at the hunt, and he mentions there that he believes that he is one of the few Targaryens who is a dreamer. He said, many of them have been dragon riders, quite few have been dreamers, but he thinks that it's a true dream, the one he had about his son on the Iron Throne wearing the Conqueror's crown. Other dreamers in the family that we know of or have hints of, well, it seems that Aegon the Conqueror was a dreamer.
Revealed by the show, basically.
Revealed by the show. Unless it was Visenya who was the dreamer and we just think it came from Aegon or
not utterly impossible.
Not utterly impossible.
I mean, what Ryan Condal claimed, but at least he says that George said, oh, by the way, Aegon was a dreamer and he dreamt.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. So probably... I mean, Visenya was the one who dabbled in dark arts, but it doesn't necessarily, or supposedly dabbled in dark arts and was a sorceress. But...
Yeah, which ties into the whole George emphasizing that there are blood mages among the Valyrians as well. So
true. So there's definitely magic stuff going around in the veins of the Valyrian blood and the Targaryen blood. The first dreamer that we know of among the Targaryens is, of course, Daenerys the Dreamer, Aenor Targaryen's maiden daughter who foretold the doom of Valyria and made certain that the Targaryens could flee and that we, in fact, still have some dragon lords in the world. Later on in the storyline, there are dreamers such as Daeron Targaryen, son of Prince Maekar. Daeron the Drunken, he ends up being known as because the dreams kind of plague him to some extent, and he obviously finds it difficult to know that he sees the future of some of his family, and it often seems to concern Targaryens and themselves and their fate and so on.
Yeah.
Things that they're involved in. Then we have Daemon the Second Blackfyre, son of Daemon Blackfyre, who also had dreams about, his family fortunes, and they sort of come true, but dreams don't always come true in the way you expect them.
The interpretation is very, very difficult.
As with all prophecy, it's a two-edged sword. Brynden Rivers, more known as Lord Bloodraven, may also have been a dreamer. I mean, he seems to clearly have had green dreams from his Blackwood side of the family.
Yeah.
Whether he also had what one would call dragon dreams, Targaryen dreams, is more uncertain. And certainly Daenerys seems to have dreams. Whether they
There are
are
some suggestive dreams that are kind of like the one where she sees herself on a dragon and melting men armored in ice, and
none of those have directly come true in the book, so we don't know for sure whether they are actual prophecy or prophetic dreams. But Bloodraven has a quote regarding the whole Targaryen and Targaryen dreamers, saying that there have always been Targaryens who dreamed of things to come since long before the conquest. So whether there were other Valyrians who also had them, or whether this was something unique to the Targaryen line.
I never really thought of that. That could be unique to him. Huh?
Certainly, people didn't seem to credit Daenerys the Dreamer with foretelling the doom. So perhaps the foretelling or the dreaming ability was not that common among other Valyrians.
That reason, like, immediately a thing that pops into my head is many of the Targaryens had some contact with Westeros, and the First Men and green dreams got into the line.
And then turned into dragon dreams, because we don't really know what the relationship is there. I mean, from A Song of Ice and Fire, we know that, for example, Jojen speaks of the green dreams, and they are literally green. There's a feeling of green or a tint of green to them, and those are the true dreams. And this certainly seems to be a First Man coming from the children. Yeah,
but Children of the Forest, of course, they called their sort of wise ones or magic workers the Green Seers, and so they clearly see, and it ties into the weirwoods, it ties into seeing through them, but also ties into these prophetic dreams that they can have, which are always very symbolic. There's metaphorical. You don't see actual things.
You have to interpret them and sort of, as I said, they're symbols. And of course, the dragon dreams are generally symbolic as well.
Yeah.
In that they usually use the dragons as their symbols for something. Dragons, dragon eggs, and things like that.
Dragons feature,
And those stand in for often Targaryens, which actually, now that I think about it, makes me wonder about whether Viserys is right that his dream was a true dream. Because it's not symbolic. It's actually quite straightforward. He sees his son on the Iron Throne with the Conqueror's crown, and hears the dragons roaring. Yes, the dragons are there, but it's not symbolic.
I think I'm going to put this down to a show thing for making visions that are very prosaic. But that's an interesting point.
It doesn't follow the pattern of the ones we see, especially Daeron the Drunken's dreams have
a dragon dying, and Dunk would be there, or
so I feel like it should have been a dragon instead, perhaps, or something. But
if they wanted to be more in keeping, I mean, maybe we're supposed to take out of it, but he's convinced himself that this is a real dream. And it's
Yeah.
not. I mean, he said he had it the once, and he tried to capture it again, and he never had it again. But
And no others, whereas we know others had multiple dreams.
no other that we know of. Does he say he's never dreamt? He only said he hasn't dreamt that dream.
True. He
So
hasn't
I don't
dreamt that.
know.
But he doesn't mention anything else that
No,
has come
no,
true or
it is,
anything like that.
very
So,
interesting.
but yes, actually, your thought there about whether something could have gotten into the Targaryen lines. I mean, there were some potentially children of the forest or relations to them in Essos as well.
Well, yes, there are the children. I want to say relations, but there were children of the forest. The kingdom of the Ifiquevron.
Yeah.
In the north of Essos, maybe they had contact with those. I mean, these are supposed to be children, I think. There's also various things tying maybe or maybe not Valyrians or Proto-Valyrians were involved in the fighting of a long night in Westeros, and then they left, and there's lots of speculation about all those things. So that's an interesting thought, though. It's really interesting. With Daenerys, people didn't seem to believe her, and no one else seemed to have these dreams. That's interesting, because it's a big thing. Like, hey, our civilization is going to be destroyed.
I mean, obviously, this is a trope that literature and myth have used many times. Cassandra, Jor-El. It's so it's a common one, the idea that somebody won't. But if they have magic, they have their blood mages, they have potentially somehow mixed blood with dragons in the past. It's not like they're in a position to discredit magical occurrences, and yet they do not listen to her.
Right. No. The other material we'd like to discuss are Jaehaerys, the Old King, and King Alysanne and their daughters. Like it mentioned in passing in the course of...
As driving Jaehaerys is mad, basically. He had peace and plenty in his reign, but the daughters were driving
in particular,
him
yeah. Yes and no. So, okay, they had 13 children in total, and sadly only 2 of them would actually survive their parents. Of those 13, 7 were daughters. Some weren't really a problem, like Alyssa, named after their own mother, Alyssa Velaryon, at least in the books. We don't know what they're doing on the show. She was the mother of Viserys and Daemon. She really didn't cause any headaches. Other than, she had a habit. She loved flying. She really loved flying her dragon. And when she had her kids, she would almost immediately strap them onto her chest and go flying with them on dragon back. There was Septa Magel, who was a very pious and, kind woman who ended up passing away after contracting grayscale.
I think she was treating
the afflicted and died of that. And there was little Princess Daenerys, who is the first Daenerys that we know of in the Targaryen family, but goes unmentioned in The Song of Ice and Fire, where the current Daenerys is called the second Daenerys, and she should be the third. That's something we point out to George. George did not seem to care. But anyway, Princess Daenerys, who died too young of the shivers, which was actually quite a significant thing, because one of the concepts behind the Valyrians, that they were, nearer to gods than men, the doctrine of exceptionalism that kind of allowed them to have incest, kind of rested in part on the idea, we don't get sick from the normal stuff that you get sick from. But the shivers, this plague that swept Westeros, killed the princess. So
and obviously Septa Magel died from grayscale.
Now, there's arguments that both of these may have some magical roots, and that may make them different from other diseases. I don't know about that, but it's an interesting thought. So let's get to the ones who are trouble.
Yes, obviously it was all troublesome for the parents, that the ones that died young, of course.
Yes.
So they had, generally very bad luck with their children, but they also had some that were more difficult to deal with. Now, Daella was not in any way a bad girl, but she was a little bit simpler. She was very fragile and easily frightened. When she saw a Summer Islander for the first time, she screamed in fear, thinking that his black skin meant that he was a demon, and she grew terribly seasick when she was visiting a young Corlys Velaryon.
The only complaint about him was that he just talked about ships and sailing all the time.
Yes, I think they were trying to marry them off.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, that's what they were trying to do. And no, so she wasn't, particularly clever or really good at anything. So it was difficult to find a husband for her. Finally, she was wed to Lord Arran, who was old enough to be her father and already had several children. But he was a very kind and gentle man towards her, apparently. Unfortunately, she was very frail and she did not survive childbirth. And Emma Arryn, Rhaenyra's mother, is actually that daughter who she bore, but she didn't survive her. So, very sad story, and I know a lot of people have complained about her father insisting that she needed to be married off. But I think one take is that they wanted her taken care of. They wanted her to have a family of her own, presuming that, she would outlive them, and then what would she do as a, old woman or a spinster, nobody to protect her, because I think they felt that she needed a protector.
That's a really good point. I haven't thought it entirely that way. I've always thought it was a little... Jaehaerys...
She could have gone into the faith, of course.
They said like she couldn't even remember. She could barely read, and she could barely remember any prayers. So she wasn't really suited for it. Ideally, yes, she would just be allowed to just live her life and be taken care of by her siblings after her parents are gone, and simply just that kind, sweet, kind of simple aunt, Daella. But Jaehaerys, the other thing is, part of it. What you'll discover with Jaehaerys when you read Fire and Blood, if you have not read Fire and Blood, is he was a great king, and the reason his daughters gave him so much trouble was partly because, despite his long association with Alysanne and their collaboration, very successful collaboration, he was very much a traditionalist, and that included traditional sexism. He was a little sexist. He treated daughters very differently than he treated sons.
They were more commodities to be married off, and he wanted them to have traditional female roles. Obviously, like we mentioned, Alyssa, she was married, obviously, quite early on to one of her brothers.
Yeah.
Not that it was something that he had to force on them. It was one of those Targaryen things where
it was a love match.
There was a love match.
Yeah.
They
just happened to be full siblings, yes.
Yeah, they just happened to be full siblings, but they were very fond of each other.
Yeah.
Apparently the wedding night was rather loud, I think.
Yeah.
Now, somebody who definitely brought trouble on herself with great effort rather than just falling into it as poor Daella was Sarah. She was the truly great scandal. It was discovered when she was quite young that she had been carrying on with young knights and corrupting at least one of her female companions.
When we say carrying on, they
they were
having sex frequently and doing this entirely
inappropriate things for young ladies.
So it all kind of came out when the said companion was turned up pregnant by one of the men.
Yeah. So I think there were two women in total that there were three girls, right? I think, and a couple of knights and something like that. And when this was found out, she lied. And then she tried begging and even threatening, and refused to accept becoming a novice in the Silent Sisters, which was Jaehaerys decided that that was the only recourse with her. She ran off to the Free Cities and became a prostitute in the pillow houses, apparently still wearing her novice garb so that the patrons could pretend that they were despoiling a virgin, which apparently hadn't been the case for quite a while.
Yeah.
And eventually she moved on from Volantis to Volantis from Lys, where she founded a profitable pleasure house. And there were three of her bastards would show up and lay their claim before the Great Council in 101 AC. So
that whole passage between with her lying, begging, threatening, that's actually very much a homage to I Claudius, where Augustus's daughter is revealed to have been.
Yeah.
It's a great scene, actually. If you just a scene where Augustus has learned of it and proceeds to stare at the many, many, many men who are alleged to have known his daughter. It's a wonderful scene. I Claudius is actually very good. George often brings
And
it
he
up.
meant known, by the way.
Known them in
The biblical sense.
the biblical sense. So yeah, Sarah was quite the handful. Finally, another handful was Visera, who was very spirited, and she was the most beautiful of daughters. And she knew it. She was extremely vain. Shortly after Alyssa, her older sister, had died, giving birth, she set her eyes on her brother Balin, who was a widower. He was not interested. They knew it was not a good match for a lot of reasons. And it's suggested by some, it's suggested, I think, in the text as well, that Alysanne was jealous of her daughter's beauty, but it makes no sense to me.
No.
Like, it makes zero. It's not, Alysanne is not shown to have that kind of vanity at all at any point. There's nothing. I think she was just troubled by her ambition and her causing trouble. Her she I think there's an anecdote how squires would call her a goddess, and she'd say, "I know." Like she really was, I think, ashamed to have such a spoiled, vain daughter more than anything. So they ended up arranging a betrothal to Lord Manderley, and she actually ended up trying to seduce Balin by allegedly slipping into his bed while drunk and completely naked.
It wasn't actually that he returned to his chambers and found her naked in his bed.
Yes, she snuck away and slipped into it. She kind of got past the guards of his and into it, and he turned her away. And not long after that, after another drunken night of revelry where she said, I'm going to have a last adventure before going to White Harbor to get married, she ended up taking part in a horse race in the streets of King's Landing and was thrown from her horse and killed instantly. So that was the end of Visera.
The last child that also caused mostly a lot of heartache for them, really. She was, again, not a troublesome child. There was Gael, called the Winter Child, because she was born in Alysanne's old age.
And in the winter as well, actually.
Yes. She was another who was a little simple-minded. I wonder if... how late was actually Daela? No, she wasn't that...
No.
Late, so I was thinking that it had something to do with the age there.
Well, I think it's actually a little bit of because of course Vagan, the son who actually outlives them because of Maester, he's really described in a way that suggests he's on the spectrum, as we would call it. So I think this is partly a little side of the incest.
It could be
having impacts.
Yes, it could be actually.
What Gael
might be the age of her mother, but so. Alysanne, she was a very sweet girl, and Alysanne doted on her, kept her by her side. But in 99 AC, she disappeared from court, and it was only later learned that a singer had seduced her and gotten her a child. The child died in a stillbirth, and Gael was so bereft at losing the child that she drowned herself in a river.
Yeah,
that one's
really sad.
That was really sad. Alysanne had thought she was much too old to have another child, and she'd already lost children, and really loved this girl, and it did not turn out well.
George can be very cruel when he takes these characters that he loves and he just puts them through the ringer. Yeah, it's very sad.
Having obviously, it's not uncommon that you had a lot of children in the Middle Ages, and many of them died. Usually at younger ages, I would say. More younger deaths, but here all sorts of misfortune would strike later in life. It was really only young Daenerys who died at a very young age. There was
at least one stillbirth.
Yes.
But, or not a stillbirth. I think he just survived a few days.
That's true. But more of them who...
That would be Valerian. Valerian.
Yeah.
Well, when we talk about Rise of a Dragon nearer to publication, I'll come back to Valerian. And finally, some dragon facts. Not too much to say here. Sea Smoke, the dragon that Laenor has, is described as a young dragon when Laenor first bonded him in 101 AC. And actually, Laenor loved the dragon. He's described as Laenor's pride and passion. That's a direct quote. Did not take part in the campaigns in Fire and Blood. Laenor was not a martial figure, as we discussed. By changing it, by making him a knight, by making also changing the sort of the dating of things a little bit, I think it works fine. To have him involved.
They don't actually name the dragon.
Yeah.
In the episode, we just see him showing up on Sea Smoke. So it's quite interesting that there was no reference at all.
Is he named?
No,
but we've seen 6 episodes. I don't think he's named.
No, I don't think they actually name him, but
strange.
one has to presume that it is intended.
I bet
to
you
be
a character guide will mention that actually.
That's true. It might very well.
They have a character guide, an official character guide that HBO's put up with some cool images and things. So, the other dragon, I guess, is Caraxes.
Yes, we see a lot of Caraxes in this episode. We see how very serpentine Caraxes is being depicted as. He even has these little extra wings on his back legs to.
Which was like, we don't think this dragon could fly without those extra wings. Guys, hint the dragon couldn't fly regardless of
no,
the wings he had.
It's magic. But yes, they've decided to go extremely serpentine with his design, more so probably than George actually intended.
When I first saw the design, I thought, okay, this is probably more what George means. But now looking at it, I think they've actually gone beyond even how serpentine.
I think the neck is fine, maybe.
I think that I would shorten the neck a little bit. I did give a little more heft to the body, and the tail I think is fine.
Yeah, but he's a very feisty one, and we see an interesting detail when at the fighting where Daemon is looking for Kragas Rehar, and he is hit by a fire arrow. And we see a reaction from Caraxes actually, so there's definitely supposed to be most likely a connection between the dragons and the riders. So if the rider is hurt, there seems to be some feedback to the dragon. I don't know if it's supposed to go the other way as well.
This was the bit where the arrows first come, Daemon kind of shields himself and immediately cuts to the dragon lifting its left wing and shielding. It's almost, I don't know if the idea is he was pulling on the rein and the rein got the dragon to do that, or if it's literally the dragon is somehow reacting sympathetically to what he's doing.
Because certainly the dragon's large enough that just that little shift in his body shouldn't really tell the dragon that he needs to. It's not a horse that you just I'm shifting my weight a little bit and the horse is going to.
I don't think the dragon would notice at all.
No, it's a little fly on its back.
So that is it for this episode, and we'll be back next week to discuss the next episode, whose title I'm not sure has been released. I don't recall quite if it has. I can't quite recall. They've been very strange with the titles. They used to make a whole big deal about announcing them, and now it's like
they are out there, but whether that's just leaked or whether they actually announced them, we haven't been able to figure out. But you'll know by next week. Until then.